Fayetteville State University in Seabrook Auditorium on August 28th, and we've got a bunch of people here in the studio, but let's start with the guy that we know, and that's our friend Dr. Wayne Riggins.
Hey, morning.
It is good to see you. How you been?
I've been busy.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is a good thing.
Let's talk a little about this documentary, which is called Not Just Pictures,
Right.
and how you got involved with, I mean, you're an eye doctor.
Right.
How did you get involved with something that deals with child pornography?
Well, you know, I told you a long time ago that if the most important thing that people have to say about me when I'm done is that I was an eye doctor, I probably screwed up. So one of the things we like to do in our practice, and as you know we've done it here on the radio, is to talk about things that we think are important.
Right.
We actually have a person on our staff that part of her job is to just go try to do good things in the community. So I got involved in that way. Jan and Pat and Sharon, I've known them for more than 20 years. In fact, Sharon was my boss when I was in the military. You know,
I did not know that.
Yeah, she was my. So if I keep saying "ma'am," yes, ma'am, this morning, that's really why, because she used to slap me when I didn't do that.
Why don't you introduce Dr. Cooper? If you're going to talk about her, why don't we introduce Dr. Sharon Cooper?
Dr. Sharon Cooper. So Dr. Cooper is a forensic specialist in pediatrics and one of the world's experts on these issues. And Jan and Pat are the owners, the proprietors of Groundswell Pictures. And so I've had the great good fortune of being friends with them all for more than 20 years. And when they began to talk about this issue, they knew, of course, far more about it than I did. But because we try to do good things in the community, when I thought, holy cow, this affects our kids, and when I saw the magnitude of the problem, I thought, well, we really don't have a choice but to get involved. And as you know, I operate on kids and a lot of not kids.
Right.
So my involvement with kids has been continuous since I've been in practice. But when you hear the rest of the story, when your listeners hear the rest of the story this morning, here's what I wanted them to take away. The world premiere of this documentary is 28 August. That's 28 August. Mark it on your calendars now. That's 28 August, 7 p.m. Seabrook Auditorium at FSU. Great auditorium if you have never been there. And also I want you to know that this is locally produced, and it involves one of the world's experts on this particular issue who's also kind of locally produced.
And that brings us to introducing Dr. Sharon Cooper, the CEO of Developmental and Forensic Pediatrics. 21 years, as Dr. Riggins just mentioned, in the Armed Forces, retiring as a colonel. Good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
I'm great. It is great to meet you. And let's introduce the filmmakers as well, Jan Johnson and Pat Wright. Good morning to both of you. Good to see you again.
Good morning. Good to see you, and thanks for having us.
Where should we start here? With Dr. Cooper? Should we start with the film? You guys tell me where you think we should.
Cooper would be a great person. The reason for the film is Dr. Cooper,
Yes.
so let's start with her.
Okay.
Well, we decided that there was really the time had come when we needed to educate the communities and the nation regarding the victim impact when images are on the internet of children. These images might be on the internet through criminal behavior by offenders such as parents or teachers or coaches and others who have unfortunately sexually abused a child, and then memorialize that by taking either pictures or videos. Or these images may have gotten on the internet by an individual who's been grooming a child through a social networking site like Facebook, talking to them and saying, hey, why don't you send a picture of yourself to me? I just want to have this. Or these images may get on the internet by teen dating violence, where a child is given alcohol or some other type of date rape drug, and then images are taken of them. But however those images get on the internet, once they're on the internet, it is life-changing for the children, and it's life-changing for their families. And this is something that many, many people have not understood or recognized for years.
When I was reading a little bit about the documentary, Not Just Pictures, and I came upon the fact that it is now a multi-billion-dollar industry, one of the fastest growing businesses online. Child porn. It's not like we're talking about something you can buy on Amazon.com or, you know, the new Chuck Taylor sneaker.
Correct.
We're talking about child porn now being a multi-billion-dollar industry. How did that happen?
Right. Well, it began with having these images sold. There used to be videos that people could go online and in the secret recesses of their homes pay $29.99 for a document, or not a documentary, but a video.
Right.
But this child pornography we now are calling child abuse images, because many people think the term pornography means children are just modeling, that this is not really abuse, but in fact it's a digital crime scene. Every time you see these kinds of images, they are digital crime scenes. And so the United States is kind of behind in using that kind of terminology, but in other parts of the world it's never referred to as pornography, because that also infers consent, and children cannot give consent to sexual abuse. So those two dynamics make us try to bring the new terminology to the table, to the community, to law enforcement, and to people who want to say, oh, aren't these just pictures? They are so much more than just pictures.
Does the fact that internet technology is still a recent development, does that mean that we don't have safeguards in place yet to prevent these images from being distributed? Are we woefully behind the curveball here on stopping this?
It's really been a long-term struggle, and the answer to that is yes, you're right. Not only from internet pornography distribution, but also from cell phone distribution, because that's the other means in which these images remain and get out there. And the thing that happens with children and their families is when images become available online, children are so extraordinarily shamed. They are so extraordinarily traumatized that many times they can't go to school. A lot of times they can't take classes that have the human body in them, like biology classes. They remain very paranoid for years, simply because they're so afraid someone is going to see the images of abuse that happened to them many years ago.
As I was reading about this last night, first of all, Dr. Cooper has testified not only in front of the European Commission and most recently the Italian Senate on child sexual exploitation, but you have testified before our own United States Congress on this. And when I saw that some of these victims are as young as 18 months old,
Yes, and even younger.
You shake your head and you go, 1.5-year-old old babies.
Right, that's correct. It tells us that there is a demand. There is a demand for this type of material. And people will spend lots of money in undercover means in order to access this kind of material.
This is in demand to whom? Is it mostly men? Is it a combination of men and women? Is there an age that is most going after this? Is it teenagers? Is it older men? Who's demanding this, Dr. Cooper?
Well, the primary offenders tend to be adult men. And what we see with those types of offenders is that they have had an interest in this long before the internet. They, however, were very isolated at that time and saw themselves as not good people. However, once we started having the internet with news groups and chat rooms, etc., these men began to network. And then they began to believe, I'm not that abnormal, this is pretty normal. And so, I'm going to just go ahead and dialogue with anybody else.
So they're communicating with like-minded adults.
Absolutely, yes. And frequently we see rings of men. These can be very large rings that are international in nature. And they will be buying and trading images and producing images. In fact, most of the time when there's a sex ring, an individual can't get into that ring unless they produce brand new images that have never been seen on the internet before. So this will require that children are abused in order for a person to enter into that type of relationship.
Talking with Dr. Sharon Cooper, I know you say the term child sexual exploitation refers to 5 different types of abuses of children.
Yes.
Can you just run through them quickly for us?
Right. The first one are child abuse images, what we've just been talking
Right.
about. The second is the selling of children from families for the purpose of either paying rent or for drugs or for...
So prostitution.
It would be, but prostitution usually infers that a child is selling themselves. This is interfamilial trafficking.
Okay.
The third type is cyber enticement, where a person is grooming and luring a child online, and very often images come into play. And if a child gives in to giving a few images or sending some sexually provocative or maybe even explicit images, those images are then used against the child to blackmail them into further production. We call that sextortion. The fourth type is sex tourism, and that's where people travel from one country to another in order to have sex with children, and they often make images and videos as their keepsake from that particular kind of traveling. And then the final type is the commercial sexual exploitation of children, which entails all the aspects of trafficking, sex trafficking of children. And in the United States, when we're talking about children who are trafficked from one part of the United States to another part, that's referred to as domestic minor sex trafficking. So these are all the different types of sexual exploitation that we see. And recently we've begun to see self-production of images as a form of boyfriend-girlfriend interactions, which doesn't just happen in youth, that happens in adults as well. And unfortunately, those kind of images can get out of control and be used as a form of blackmail.
These people who travel to have sex with children, recently because of all the gun violence, we've been talking a lot about mental health here in America.
Right.
How do our mental health issues and the fact that we're just not dealing with them very well, how does this relate to the subject that we're talking about here this morning? Because obviously an adult man who wants to have sex with as young as an 18-month-old child has some mental problems.
Yes.
How are we dealing with these, Dr. Cooper?
Well, we first of all are trying to identify these individuals. There are plenty of people who have a preferential interest in children who never act on that. And that's an important thing for us to recognize. Having that kind of interest doesn't mean that you have to act on it. And in fact, there is an international hotline for people like that called Stop It Now. And anyone who's thinking about maybe I'm really interested, maybe I should take that next step, can call this hotline. You can go online and just type in Stop It Now, and a live person will talk to you and help you understand how much harm you would be doing to that child. And so the mental health issue is definitely a significant reality, and we want to be able to provide appropriate services for individuals to prevent this from happening.
Are these young kids, not necessarily the 18-month-olds, but 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, what is the damage that is being caused physically, emotionally, mentally? Do some of these younger kids even know what is happening to them?
Sometimes children do not know. If they're toddlers, for example, they may not know that they have been sexually abused, but their parents know. And when their parents know, they begin to parent these children differently. They become very protective, hyper-vigilant. They're always watching other people. They don't let their children participate in a lot of different activities over their lives. And we have a law in the United States called the Justice for All Act. So if a child has been abused and her images or his images are on the internet, and someone has been arrested for having those images, then the family has to be notified that someone has been downloading or trading those images. We have met families that get notified 8-10 times a week for years because people are continuing to download, trade, and possess their images. This causes parents to not want to let their children be cheerleaders, to not want to let their children go out to normal youth-serving organizations like the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts because they're too afraid that something else is going to happen to their child.
Let's take a break here, and then when we come back, we'll talk to our two
Welcome
filmmakers.
to the show. It's good to see both of you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Talk about your history, because I know you go back well before Groundswell Pictures. I remember seeing a very nice piece on the two of you in City View magazine a couple of years ago. Talk about your history here in Fayetteville.
Well, about 22 years ago, Pat and I decided to start a media production company called Moonlight Communications. Ironically, we wanted to start it because we felt like we could make a difference in the areas of child abuse and spouse abuse, which was so prevalent in this area. We thought that we could work behind the scenes helping people with that problem and helping reduce the incidence of it here. Actually, Fort Bragg gave us our first opportunity within just a year or two of our starting business. And we do a lot of other productions. We do corporate television shows, we do commercial, and we do documentary. But our love is documentary production, and so last year we started a nonprofit called Groundswell Pictures because we wanted to create a groundswell of change in many areas, social change that benefits our community.
And now we are working on this documentary, not just pictures. And the whole reason we got started was because we had a conversation much like this with Sharon Cooper over at our house, and she was telling us about the problem. We were like, we've got to do something. You know, let us help you do something. Are there films out about this? And she indicated that she had not seen a single one and didn't know of any that were on this topic. And so we thought, we've got to get into this and get to it now.
It's a tough subject.
It is tough, and the national conversation is now okay to talk about sex trafficking, but taking it this additional step and talking about images of children being sexually abused, being traded online is an additional step that is hard to hear, but it's in the darkness and secrecy that it's allowed to flourish. So we've got to talk about it so that we can know what steps to take to protect our kids.
So talk a little about the documentary. And again, it's called Not Just Pictures, with the world premiere about a month away at Seabrook Auditorium. Because as we were just talking a little bit about during commercial, you don't want people to think that they're going to come into this theater and they're going to see a movie that shows these images, which can be very disturbing and distasteful. So talk a little about how you had to set out to make this documentary without it just being a series of these images.
Well, Dr. Cooper is the executive producer on this, and she has connections all over the world and all over the United States. So she set up interviews with people in the field of protecting our children, national and international centers for missing and exploited children, the U.S. Marshal's Office. We can go on and on. We've taken 40 interviews, more than 40 interviews across the U.S. and Canada, and also at Interpol in Bermuda, the Interpol conference. And that is how we started. We also wanted to hear from victims and survivors and victims' parents, and talk to them about how they've healed or what happened when things were not going right. So our intention with this film is to present the problem and then present solutions for us to use, everyday things you can do to protect the children.
Talk a little about the healing process here. What did the kids tell you? What did the parents tell you?
Well, healing from child sexual abuse is one thing, where you have a process you can go through, you come to it on your own terms. You can take it out, look at it, discuss it with a psychologist or someone in the field, and come to some sort of resolution about it. But when there are images, it's an additional layer of harm, in that every time, as Dr. Cooper mentioned, you get this notice saying the image has been downloaded, someone has been enjoying themselves while looking at the image of your abuse. It reopens that wound. It is a continual harm that does not stop, and as a result, people have the rational paranoia where they go into spaces where people are on their phones or on their laptops or their iPads or whatever, and they wonder, is somebody looking at me? Are they looking, or have they seen me? You know, there's a story of one young woman who was abused as a child, and she got a job at a restaurant, and she went to take this guy's order, and he said, "You look familiar. Have I seen you somewhere?" And that was it. That pushed her over the edge. Just that simple comment. There are stories of kids who can't go to college in a real college setting because it involves people on computers and crowds, and it just, you know, the rational paranoia that they have is just too much. And the perpetrators actually do try to follow some of these kids. We interviewed one of the more popular women who had her images on the internet, and she has people who have chat rooms set up where they talk about her images and where do they think she's living and how they'd like to get back together with her. She's an adult now,
right?
You know, with a family of her own, but they are still, you know, back in that world, back, you know, a dozen years ago, looking at those images and talking about how much she must have liked it. It's just, you know, so these things you just can't get over. It goes on and on and on.
And one of the things we know about the internet is, even when you hit delete, nothing is ever deleted. It is still out there for all to see, especially people who have the ins and outs of the internet and how to bring these images back, even after they've been deleted. Dr. Cooper, after you saw the film, what did you think? what do you want people to take away from the film after they see it?
The most important thing that I want people to understand is that these are hidden victims. This is an issue children cannot talk about very easily. Their families can't talk about it very easily. And so we need to be very mindful. This affects how a child will be able to function in school. It's very traumatic, and we need to be very proactive in trying to make sure that their lives are going to be mindfully managed and wellness managed. Because we also know that when children sustain these kinds of experiences, it affects their health over life. A huge study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, has now shown us that when you have experiences like this, not only does it disrupt your ability to be well educated because you just become so stressed out all the time, it makes you at very high risk once you become an adolescent of adopting high risk behaviors like drinking and smoking and using drugs and running away. And then that leads you down a trajectory of poor health and an earlier death. So because of this, we want to be very proactive as individuals who won't bury this. If you're a parent and something like this has happened to your child, you don't want to just say, it's going to go away, we're not going to talk about it, because that will not help the child, nor will it help the family.
Two last questions here. How often, and I know that I'm sure many times parents are responsible for prostituting their children and distributing these images, how often do parents not know this is happening to their children? It's a third party. It's someone outside the home. It's someone outside the family. So how often are parents oblivious to the fact that this is happening to their children? And then for all the parents that are listening this morning, how do you protect your kids? And I'll open that up to anybody.
Many times the offenders are family members, but not always. And there are some very high-profile cases where offenders were high-profile people, such as the case of Dr. Earl Bradley, a pediatrician in Delaware, who abused and memorialized that abuse in more than 100 of his patients, most of whom were less than 5 years of age. Those are parents who are extraordinarily wounded, and the road to getting better, first of all, is to seek mental health care for the child and family. Can't just speak for the child. Secondly, it is to consider how to best protect your child from cyberbullying, because what also happens if a victim is known, as you might see in adolescent cases where a kid might take images or videos of another child and put them on the internet, and then this child is now being called names and cyberbullied. We have to provide some real guidelines. Should you send that child to school? Maybe not, because very often when a child has been wounded in that manner, they are repetitively bullied from school to school to school, and the incidence of suicidality is much higher for those types of children. So we need to have guidelines for mental health care providers, for schools, for families, on how to best care for children in these situations.
All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
One last thing I wanted to bring up. For those of you who want to really do something about this after hearing this segment, I want you to go to notjustpicturesmovie.com. Buy a ticket. It's 28 August, 7 p.m., Seabrook Auditorium. Buy a ticket for yourself. Buy a ticket for anybody that you care about that has children that you want to protect. You want to do something, spend some money to help these folks who are trying to get the message out. Get the message out. Another thing, Kickstarter.com. You can make a contribution. These friends of mine, part of the reason I've been trying to help financially is they have to do this on a shoestring budget. This is all local money. So if you want to help, take some pennies, take some dollars, take as much money as you want, and send it to this cause, because I think it's worthwhile. Thanks, Goldie.
All right, we got to leave it there. Thank you to all of you. I do want to mention that not only the world premiere of the movie on August 28th, but also an Internet Safety Expo is going to be going on at Skyview on Hay, August 28th and August 29th. A good website for people to find out all about the movie and the Internet Safety Expo?
NotJustPicturesMovie.com.
There you go, NotJustPicturesMovie.com. Dr. Wayne Riggins, Dr. Sharon Cooper, Jan Johnson, Pat Wright from Groundswell Pictures. Good luck, and I thank you all for coming and talking about a tough subject that not a whole lot of people want to talk about these days. A pleasure seeing everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.